Hey guys, welcome. We'll give it a minute and we'll go ahead and get started. Stand by. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started, guys. Start on time, end on time, right? Welcome to the first training of 2021. If you're like me, we're what, 15 days into 2021. I want my money back. So we'll have to see how that goes. So we have a couple of guests on the call today, Amanda and Chris Greehey. So wave, Amanda and Chris. Welcome, welcome. So this is, so every other week we do a training like this, and every alternate week we do a traditional office meeting. So that'll be next week. We'll review sales numbers and sales tips, and those that have listings can promote those listings, and all sorts of good stuff. But this week, I chose the topic of all things condominiums because like kind of farm and ranch, or like a commercial piece of business, or unimproved land, you don't see a lot of these transactions. And so because of that, we're out of practice, and we think that they're maybe more complicated than they really are. So today is going to serve to kind of demystify everything about condominiums. So it's interesting because I think, yeah, I mean, in my experience, you're either dealing with, in the condominium world, some dumpy properties that were built in the 80s, or these huge skyscrapers that are, top of the line. And so, as you know, they're not building any more land, so you can't go out. So a lot of towns are going up with projects like condominiums. Okay, and so the chances are pretty good that you will be in a transaction involving a condominium. So few things to consider when you're entering into this realm. And by the way, all of you entered into the meeting is muted. So if you have any questions, be sure to unmute yourself. But questions, well, what does the owner really own? So we kind of talk about, the condominium structure, but there are some considerations with regards to what an owner actually owns within their condominium. There are FHA and lending guidelines just overall when it comes to condominiums. And then there are very real HOA costs and restrictions. And so the HOA in the condominium world is typically called the Condo Association. I will just use the term HOA as we know that pretty implicitly. And so just know that it is the organization that's going to govern the condominium complex. All right. And then the condo unit is typically within a larger building, whereas something like a townhome is not. And an owner will usually own the land underneath a townhome. So that's one of the distinctions between condo and townhome. All right, so how does ownership work in a condo? So each owner is actually deeded ownership of the airspace within that unit. Okay, and so just to kind of bring that further to light, the owner does not own the ceiling, the walls, the floor. They own the paint on the walls, they own tile on the floor, but they do not own that aspect of that unit. They just own all the space within the four walls, ceiling, and floor. So the owner then has partial / equal ownership in the common areas to a complex, such as the pool, any off-site laundry facilities, green belts, exercise facility, or community rooms where you can have gatherings. So everyone has equal right to that space and equal ownership. Right, each owner pays an HOA to maintain the upkeep of the grounds and the the commonly owned areas. Everything in point 3 here, there is a governing body, the Condo Association, that manages all that. Okay, so they act as a management company. And so any of the fees that are paid to this organization usually always include insurance. Not always, but 99% of the time they do. So that means homeowners insurance. So it's a little bit different than conveying a single family home where that owner has to go get homeowners insurance. Now, it is always a good idea to recommend to the client that they get insurance that covers the contents of the condo. And there is special condominium insurance that does exist. Okay, so owners are typically responsible for the plumbing, electrical, HVAC. So if there is a problem that goes wrong with these entities, the owner is responsible for that. The HOA is not going to cover those repairs. All right, and then the CCRs are the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. They are what governs the use of that unit. So fun fact, in the year 2000, I began investing in real estate, and the only thing I could afford at the time were condos. And so I have bought several of these as investments. And if anyone remembers what happened shortly thereafter, the year 2000, there was a little thing called the .com crash. And because it was kind of left holding the bag and couldn't rent the things to save my life. So I sold them and moved on to single family homes. But back then, before the prevalence of the internet and having all these things online, they are as thick as like an HOA packet, right? So they're about 100, 150 pages. Normally, that is not the case anymore. They're all online, but I'll explain the importance of getting these in a second. All right, so let's discuss the differences between a condo and other pieces of real estate. So as I mentioned earlier, condo is going to be typically within a building itself with other units around them. So you are sharing ceilings, floors, and walls with your neighbors. Townhome, think of 2 stories, think of row houses, but a townhome owner does typically own the land underneath that townhome, although it is usually about as big as a postage stamp. Some of them have backyards, and they would own that land as well. But that's the main differential. There is land ownership in a townhome scenario. There is not at all in the condo. A condo versus an apartment, they are very similar in lifestyle, although an apartment does not typically have an HOA or a governing body. And obviously with an apartment you're renting, you are not owning. All right, and then a condo versus single family home couldn't be more different. Single family home, you obviously own the land. Lots of homes belong to HOAs, so that's similar. But you know, you are solely responsible for everything above and below a single family home. Okay, it is not communal living, if you will. All right, so there are lending considerations when it comes to a condo. And these are things that you need to be aware of and have gotten answers to before you take your client out to see a condo unit. So the complex may or may not be FHA approved, all right? And it's like 50-50, all right? So that is a big question to ask the lender. So if you are about to take a client out to see a condo unit, connect with the lender to make sure that that complex is FHA approved. There are usually also restrictions on how many of the units can be owner occupied, can be investor owned, and or can be used for commercial purposes. So if you have a client that wants to run a jewelry business out of their condo and make that the mailing address and all that, that may be a no-no. All right. There are typically these kinds of restrictions on all of them. And that was a consideration I had to think about when I invested, which was there was only a certain percentage of all of the units that could be non-owner occupied. Okay, so don't get too far into the transaction before you know those answers. Okay, so what contracts to use for a condo transaction? So there is a residential condominium contract. So let's just deal with resale today. That is TREC contract 30-13. And then there is the condominium resale certificate, which the seller handles. Okay, so if you represent the buyer, just know that this should be coming. And that's TREC form 32-4. And so just to go over some of the distinctions in the contract, we'll go to the first page, which is paragraph 2, B as in boy, that talks about declarations. So whenever you see the word declarations in here, they are talking about the CCRs, the covenants and restrictions, okay? So these are the bylaws that govern the entire complex. There will undoubtedly be things in here that are very important that the client understand, okay? So let's look at the options. Buyer has received a copy of the documents. Buyer is advised to read the documents before signing the contracts. That is underlined with good reason, okay? So a good listing agent will likely have the link or the actual documents in the document section of the listing, okay? Option 2, buyer has not received a copy of the documents. Seller at seller's expense shall deliver the documents to buyer within X days. I would put 3. They're there. They just have to get them to you. After the effective date of the contract, buyer, this is a biggie, buyer may cancel the contract before the 6th day after the buyer receives the documents, and this is also important, by hand delivering or mailing written notice of cancellation to the seller by certified U.S. mail, return receipt requested. If buyer cancels the contract pursuant to this paragraph, buyer gets his earnest money back and they can move on. But it is obviously a big deal, as they cite, it's got to be delivered by certified receipt requested U.S. mail. All right, so the second thing in this paragraph is paragraph C, the resale certificate. So we're going to look at the resale certificate in a moment, but think of this as a 2-page document that certifies everything financial about what your client is about to buy. Okay, so the resale certificate from the Condo Owners Association is called the certificate. The certificate must be in a form promulgated by TREC, which there is. This is it. We're going to pop that up in a second. Or required by the parties. The certificate must have been prepared at seller's expense no more than 3 months before the date is delivered to the buyer. So this is similar to the T47. This just certifies that this is no older than 3 months. Why? Because the fees and financial info in that document may have changed. So you want something up to date, and must contain a minimum the information required by section 82.157 of the Texas Property Code. So here are the options for delivering this. 1, buyers receive the certificate. 2, buyer has not received the certificate. Seller shall deliver the certificate to buyer within X days after the effective date of the contract. Buyer may cancel the contract again before the 6th day after the date the buyer has received the certificate, by hand delivering or mailing written notice of cancellation to seller by certified U.S. mail, same language as up top. 3 to 7 days, I would say, especially if you execute on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. That's plenty of time to get that in. That is the amount of time you allow to get it to you. Remember that the buyer has then 6 days to object. All right, and you'll see why they might want to object. All right, so now option 3, it says buyer has received seller's affidavit that seller requested information. So the seller tried, seller requested information from the association concerning its financial condition as required by the Texas Property Code, and that the association did not provide a certificate or any information required in the certificate. Buyer and seller agree to waive the requirement to furnish that certificate. Okay, so that's a dangerous one to check because there are a lot of fees associated with a condo. And I'd want to know. I'd want to know if there were any complaints, any legal action filed against the association, and all the other things that we'll review in a second. Okay, so just to go back, the declarations are the CCRs. Okay, it is important that they get that and read that. It is not your job to do that, but I would look for key things like you only get a choice of one company for electricity or any other utility or cable, can't barbecue on the patio, can't have things in your window that face a public area, can't hang lights on the I mean, the list goes on, but it doesn't matter until it matters. And so it's important your client reads through those to understand what it's going to be like to live there. Okay. Then it goes on into paragraph B as in David on the same page and talks about a first right of refusal. So in certain condominium complexes, they may have a policy where if an owner is selling their unit, people on a certain list will have the first right of refusal to buy that condo. Okay, and so that could be because of an investor concern, or just someone wants to buy another condo unit. And so it's not common, but it does exist. And it says if the documents, again, the CCRs, reveal that the property is subject to a right of refusal under which the association or a member of the association may purchase the property, the effective date shall be amended to the date that buyer receives a copy of the association certification that 1, the seller has complied with the requirement under the right of refusal, and 2, all persons who may exercise the right of refusal have not done so or have waived the right. if the buyer does not receive the association certification within X days after the effective date, or if the right of refusal is exercised, this contract shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. Okay, so I would put in anywhere again from 3 to 7 days. I would maybe reach out to the association and ask them what's reasonable, or even if they have this thing in place. I don't know how reasonable it is or how long it takes to get a hold of everybody that's on the list, but they could tell you. Okay, so if that doesn't happen, or if someone exercises the right of refusal, then contract is over, earnest money is refunded. Okay. Before we get into the resale certificate, I wanted to point out other aspects of this contract that differ from the 1 to 4. And let me just review the fact that you're still depositing earnest money, so that structure of it still exists. You're still getting title insurance. You are still entitled to object to those to the title commitment. You're still doing an inspection. You are still asking for repairs if need be. You are still getting a home warranty. And the closing date, and if it's a loan, you're getting an appraisal. Okay. Where it is somewhat similar yet different is in paragraph 12 under settlement and other expenses, just as it is in the 1 to 4. It does speak to the transfer fee. So there is never not an association that governs a condo complex. In a 1 to 4, there may or may not be an HOA, right? And so in paragraph 12A3, it says, except as provided by 12A4 below, buyer shall pay any and all association fees or other charges resulting from the transfer of the property, not to exceed X amount. So if you're talking about a 1 to 4, this is common language. I usually suggest putting $400 in there. That's what the buyer's on the hook for. Anything above that is going to be seller's expense. These fees vary. So before you put something in there, I wouldn't guess. I'd ask the association. So again, there is going to be a cost to transfer old ownership to new ownership. Okay, so it's important to know what number to put in there, because whatever number you put in there is what your buyer is financially responsible for. All right, there is pretty much nothing else that is different. Okay, so resale certificate. So this is done by the association, and this again is a picture of their financial standing. So if you can't read that, I'm going to read it off to you. So line A, the declaration, right, the CC&Rs, does or does not contain that right of first refusal or other restraint that restricts the right to transfer the unit. If a right of first refusal or other other restraints exist, see section blank of the declaration. So not just that restraint, but others. Line B, the periodic common expense assessment for the unit is X. So that's a biggie. Okay, so that is the monthly fee the owner will then pay to the HOA, just like an owner of a single family home pays to their HOA. Okay, the next one says there is or is not a common expense or special assessment due and unpaid by the seller, current seller, to the association. So in other words, does the owner owe anything to the association? Okay, so let's talk about a special assessment for a second. So it is not uncommon for every several years a special assessment to be assessed to the owner. Okay, and you actually want this to happen. You just don't want it to be a lot of money. But aside from what they're paying each month, I mean, every so often, the association is going to need to paint the exterior. They're going to need to restripe the parking lot. They're going to need to reseal the parking lot. They're going to need to make, major renovations to the pool, possibly, whatever. Sky's the limit, right? And so those are typically one-time charges that are clearly communicated to you, by the way, as an owner, um, that they're going to be added on to your monthly fee. They're temporary, but not a lot of people realize that when they buy a condo. And it could be, roof got hail damage, this part isn't covered by insurance, or our insurance went up, and so this is how much the difference is. So it is not uncommon. And so in this line, it speaks to, if that had happened, is the current owner in arrears for any of those special assessments? All right, then the next line says capital expenditures approved by the association for the next 12 months are. So they should have a budget with money set aside to pay for major expenses. Okay, then it says reserves for capital expenditures are. So how much is in the bank? Current operating budget and balance sheet of the association is attached. The amount of unsatisfied judgments against the association is, and then next, there are or are no other, or not any lawsuits pending against the association. The nature of the suit is, and that's if there were. And that is after, I'm sure, you and the client have looked around for any kind of complaints against the association. Okay, in this next one, the association does or does not provide insurance. The board has or has no knowledge of alterations or improvements to the unit that client is about to buy, or to the limited common elements assigned to the unit, or any portion of the project that violates any provision of the declaration, bylaws, or rules. So in other words, the current owner has not done anything known to the association that is in violation of those CCRs. All right, the board has or has not received notice from a governmental authority concerning violations of health or building codes with respect to the unit, the common areas, or any other portion of the condo complex. The remaining term of any leasehold estate that affect the condominium is, so that would be if the new owner is inheriting a lease that is known to the condo association. Okay, association's managing agent is, and then it says the association fees resulting from the transfer of the unit described above, and then those are outlined. So regardless of what you thought it was before, where I said I recommend $400, give or take, this will tell you. All right, so important to get this back within your option period, in my opinion. This could be a deciding factor, because they're going to have the mortgage, and they're going to have X amount of $100 on top of that that goes to the association. And then it says required attachments. So they're going to include the operating budget, the insurance summary, and a balance sheet. So an insurance summary is good because you're going to get to see fees, what's covered, and any past claims. All right, and then that's it. And there's contact information about the association. So timing is everything with regards to getting the resale certificate and getting the CCRs. Okay, any questions? I have a little bit more. Any questions on the contract portion? Okay, all right, so as I said before, the CCRs and resale certificate can make or break a deal based on what is in them, primarily the financial commitment. Okay, a condo appeals to someone who wants no upkeep responsibility and who wants that communal living with neighbors and the social component to it. You know, a lot of these associations have activities going on and they create, you know, a real sense of community. And a lot of times it's all that someone can afford. Right? Condos, though, typically do not appreciate in value at the same rate as a single family residence. Believe me, I found this out the hard way. And my guess is because there's no land underneath it. I mean, you're only owning a lifestyle and the air in between four walls, a ceiling, and a floor. So it is with good reason that they don't appreciate a whole lot. So if you have an investor client or anybody really that's looking to buy a condo with hopes of reselling it in 5 years, it is not going to be worth much more than the day they bought it. That's just a fact. Okay. The monthly HOA fees will usually always go up. Just another fact. And I found that out the hard way too. And it's a double whammy if there is deferred maintenance on the property that they decide to do all in 1 year, or if there's some huge financial assessment levied against the owner for major repairs or major remodeling. So it is a bit of a moving target financially when it comes to this arrangement, just FYI. Okay, and then just one thing that I also experienced, I'm sure this is really just applicable to older complexes, but repairs can be tricky in these places because sometimes the utilities are all shared. So in other words, plumbing is all shared. So if you have to make a repair, you typically have to alert everybody that is on that same plumbing or electrical grid that, you know, oh, by the way, between the hours of noon and 4, your water is going to be turned off. And so that can be problematic. That's not always the case, but when you think about everything that every unit shares, that's logical, right? So just another maybe question to ask the association, is everything independent, or are there shared components to the unit? Okay, so that was it for everything condo. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, or comments? There aren't many more contracts that you have to do with a condo, so I don't. It shouldn't be as intimidating as perhaps you once thought. I will say this, that these contracts exist for a reason. So the reason is that if you're doing a farm and ranch, or if you're doing a condo or unimproved land, there are questions that aren't included in the 1 to 4 that are sometimes of great consideration. And so the condo contract is no different. It's right there actually in paragraph 2A2 and 2A3 on the first page, where it explicitly lays out exactly what is conveyed, improvements and accessories. And just like the 1 to 4, there's a spot for exclusions if the seller wishes to exclude something. But that's why there are separate contracts for separate transactions, because there are a separate set of questions and considerations that you need to make sure your buyer is aware of. Okay? Any last thoughts? No? All right. Well, Amanda and Chris, thanks for joining us today. And we will see all you guys next Thursday. Have a good weekend.